Welcome to Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. In this podcast, we invite you to suspend all of your beliefs about leadership. When I speak about leadership, I'm not only speaking about leading in a workplace. I'm inviting you to take up your leadership mantle wherever you are. It may be in your family, it could be in your community, or even in your local netball or football teams. Wherever you are, you have the potential to lead and influence others. In this podcast, because we are asking you to suspend your beliefs, we don't want to take away from you without giving you something. So most times, our guests usually share some interesting ideas that will help you reframe leadership for your context and for your possibilities. And so today with me is my guest, Leslie Ferrier-Attong. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, good afternoon, Maxine, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolute
So my
pleasure.
name is Leslie Ferrier-Attong, and I have been in the HR space for over 20 years. Um, well, actually, much more than 20 years. And, one of the things that I love about being in HR is navigating changing landscapes. And your perspective changes so much as you navigate through the different stages of your life. And one day you're thinking other people are old. And then one day you wake up and you realize everyone on your team is younger, is much younger than you are. So I want to talk about ageism today and the impact of it in the workspace. And, of course, to see how we navigate that as we have an aging population. And I think, we can look at the facts. The facts are that most countries has an aging population. People are just not having as many children as they had before. Even in our small country of Trinidad and Tobago, they're encouraging younger women to have children. Family sizes have diminished. So
Mhm.
what we are finding is that people know the traditional the traditional thought that once a woman or a man reaches 55 to 60, that they should automatically exit the workspace. That view has now changed. Maybe a little slower here in the Caribbean, but definitely it has always been that way, probably in North America, where you see people working and living as normal into their 70s, their 80s. And really, how do we navigate ageism as we make room for all generations? So that's really, what I want to focus on today.
Well, Leslie, you've put a lot on our table, talking about your 20-year plus span as a human resource professional. I want to acknowledge that. And I love how you framed it, right? One day you're the young kid, and then you look around and all of your team is younger. And so you spoke about the change in landscape. So I'm wondering, because you also spoke about the stats, right? The fact that, there are so many, that population sizes are diminishing or stagnant. And even in small island states like Trinidad and Tobago, that has remained like that. And then you also spoke about the fact that you have noticed a difference in attitudes around aging workers, where I guess in the Caribbean, you retire, and places like the US, you keep working until you want to retire, which is a slightly different connotation. So with all of those threads that you put, which one are you going to pull apart for us a little bit more today?
Well, I was thinking, let us talk a little about how do we accommodate the Gen Xers, the baby boomers, and the older generations. There has been a lot of discussion over, I would say, the last 5, 10 years when the whole concept of really naming the different generations became popular.
Yes.
So, now in the workspace, you will have Gen X, you have the millennials, and there's always been so much discussion. How are we going to accommodate the millennials? Then it became, how are we going to accommodate the Gen Zs? How are we going to accommodate the alphas? And pretty soon that conversation will be to include the betas, right? The Gen betas. But where are the conversations that surround how do we accommodate and make space for our Gen Xers? How do we make space and accommodate the baby boomers? Because yes, we do need to accommodate the people who are younger, who are now navigating, what is really and truly a very rapidly changing career space. We did not have to deal with AI. However, we are the generation, the Gen X, we are the generation who I think has gone through most changes than any other generation. You know, we went from listening to records with our big sisters and having the turntable to cassettes, to CDs, to Walkmans, to MP3 players, and not having a phone. And there is a thought that we don't want to accommodate older people because we think that they are that they are slower, that they probably cannot adapt to new technology. When the truth of the matter is, our generation created the technology. So we need to have those conversations. How do we ensure that while our Gen Xers are getting ready to exit, we still make them feel valued? We draw on that experience in such a way that they are able to coach and mentor the generations behind, and simultaneously being honored for what they bring to the workplace. And one of the things that really made me want to discuss this, Maxine, I've been seeing a lot of discussion on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on threads about older people trying to get jobs. And the very stark reality that over a certain age, they felt that their opportunities and their abilities to really land jobs that they are qualified for has diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And it is sad because are we saying to someone that once they reach 50 or once they reach 48, that they have to take whatever they get? Is it that we are saying that if you are 52, you shouldn't look for a job that is within your experience and your qualifications, and that you should just be glad to get a job? And I think as someone who is in HR, sometimes you have to be the advocate, because I remember once having a conversation with a leader, and he was looking for an admin assistant. And the best qualified was a woman who was 50. She was 50 or 51. And he was like, oh, well, she would be too hard to train. She'd be set in her ways. I don't want anybody over 35. We couldn't get anybody, right? So eventually we did hire her. And he came back and he said, I really have to give you props. I really have to congratulate you for convincing me to hire her, because she is the best admin I've had. In fact, she is showing the younger admins what to do. And I thought it would have been the other way around. So I think we need to stop thinking that aging equals a lack of ability to continue teaching. And somehow I think we are starting to equate someone who has gray hair with someone who can't think as sharply, or someone who cannot bring real thoughts to the conversations that are being had. And that's why I say that the conversation has to be all inclusive. Yes, we have to accommodate the Gen Zs because, they grew up in a time of COVID, and they are very real after effects of that in terms of how they interact. We see a lot more people who are more, what do you call it? They're more introverted. You see a higher level of anxiety in the Gen Zs and so on. And yes, so we have to know how to lead that generation. The betas are different, a whole different generation because, you know, they were born or just before, after COVID. And that is a generation that they were born with an iPad in their hand, you know? Their first
Literally.
thought is literally, so their first thought is to go on an iPad. But we need equal conversations about our older generations.
Yes. So in this multi-generational workforce that you're speaking about, where boomers, I think it might be a little illegal to have betas with you right now, right?
It might be, but
Yeah.
but
No,
but
but the point is well
you have to
noted, though.
prepare for them,
Yes,
right?
of course, of course. And what I'm
Yeah,
hearing you say is that there is a skewing in the workplace, and that we tend to focus on the people who are younger. And
we do.
it's a kind of age-old and knee-jerk question, right? Because it's all about, oh, it used to be like, oh, we don't know about millennials, you know, the roll eye, and now it's like the death stare of the Z's or alphas. And so
Correct.
there's always this knee-jerk reaction. And what never changes is really about what are we doing with our older people? That's not really a conversation that you see. Everybody
No.
talks about what do we do about these people? What do we do about those trends? And so I love what you said in terms of the some of those older generations are the generations who have been adapting to change every 5 years. And you gave the example from record player right to phone where you're now streaming. And so what do you think is the reason for that skewing in terms of not looking at older people at the fact that they have adapted and they continue to adapt and really want to focus on younger people? What do you think is the basis of that?
It depends on how much time you have, Maxine, because
Go right ahead.
really and truly, we can look at that conversation from many angles.
Mm-hmm.
One, we glorify youth, right? We glorify youth.
Hence Botox, right?
You know, I am seeing estheticians telling people to start taking Botox at 20, in their early 20s.
Yeah.
This is crazy. That is when your skin is at its best. But I
Yes.
think that one, we glorify youth.
Mm-hmm.
Two, there has been a trend towards people looking as young as possible over the, you know, and it has become more affordable. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when I was growing up, only stars had facelifts.
Yeah.
Only stars did surgeries to their bodies to look slimmer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could go and get a facelift, go and get fillers, and so on. And therefore, there has been a skewing, even in terms of the accessibility of youth.
Okay, yeah.
And therefore, we now have to ask the question, what is that doing, not only in terms of us having false expectations and putting pressure in terms of looks,
Mm-hmm.
but what is it doing in terms of us thinking that everyone must look and
Young.
therefore
Mm-hmm.
maybe all think the same way?
Yeah.
Because we are now moving into a territory where there isn't much room for individual thoughts.
So I wanna stick a
And
pin there and just stay with this
yes,
before you move on. So what I'm really hearing from what you're saying, at least what I'm thinking about, is that there, so there is a low tolerance for looking older now because
it's
of the
yes,
accessibility of beauty, you know, beauty fixes, Botox, whatever it is. That's one. And then the second thing is that there seems to be an assumption, or I should say a linkage between how you look and what you can do.
yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we judge with our eyes first. Yeah. Hence the reason if you go to culinary school, plating is an important part of your assessment. So therefore, we have come to a space where we look and we judge and we say that person looks like she or he would be too old for this position.
Okay, so I'm going to name it.
Or,
It's called ageism, right? So this is
right,
ageism, not how we traditionally think about it as you're too young to soca. This is about you're too old to wind up.
correct. So you're too old.
Hmm.
So you will go to an interview, you may be the best qualified, the most experienced, but the conversation then shifts to how many more years will this person work? This person is probably over X age. They probably will get sick. They probably, you know, don't want to work beyond 5 years. Should we invest money in someone who's over 50 for training and development? And
Hmm.
these are conversations that exclude a big part of the population. Because if I have a 50 plus person in my workspace, a 50 person, they will be there for at least 10 to 15 years. Why would I not spend money and invest in them?
Yes.
And
So I
yeah, go
want to,
ahead.
before you go on, I just want to play with that a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
because I'm just wondering what is the likelihood that somebody who's 55, because this is probably like their end of career job. What is their likelihood of them leaving the organization? Two,
Okay.
over a certain age, there's no maternity. Their kids are probably at an age where it is they wouldn't have to, where they wouldn't have to leave, right? They wouldn't have to leave the office. So those are the things that I'm thinking about as you speak. These are people who probably are more or less sort of settled within themselves, more emotionally aware. So there's less disruption. So I'm just wondering in terms of how do those things feature, or if it is that they feature at all in terms of those determinations? Because I'm figuring as HR, you've probably heard those conversations, real conversations behind the scenes. So do any of those factors play out when you're having these conversations?
Of course. And that is the role of HR to say
Hmm.
stop. One, people of all ages get ill
Yes.
and get serious illness. Let us, if we are looking at facts, the fact is if you go on a ward, if you go to a hospital, there are people of all ages for all different types of ailments.
Mm.
We grew up with a notion that there were certain illnesses that were associated with getting older.
Aging, yes.
The facts are that is no longer so.
Yes,
So
sad.
if
Yeah,
we are
that's
looking
true.
at people getting ill, then we
Mm.
have to start looking at people 35 or maybe 30, right? If we are looking at children, as you correctly said, by the time somebody is 55, most times their children are grown. They don't need to be picked up to be dropped off at brownies,
Swim
right?
class.
Or to go to swim or to dance because they're big. They could
Yeah.
navigate. They could navigate. And the fact is, when somebody who is out of university, they come and they give you 3 years, 5 years, that person is also looking to move on.
As they
Unless that
should. Yes.
person is on, a high potential path or they are star in the organization. After 3 to 5 years, most people will be looking for a new opportunity so that they can advance to the new stage of their career. So really and truly, there is no basis for the ageism when it comes to looking at employees in the workspace.
Well, there is a reason for it, and the reason is bias, right?
Okay,
So we
yes.
call a thing,
We
right? So
name it,
that
we name it,
we
yes.
name
It
it,
is
yeah, and
bias.
it is bias, yeah.
And
So
the thing about it is that we have legislated
mhm.
in most countries against bias. So you can't discriminate based on race, religion, sexual orientation, etc. But there's no real legislation against ageism,
Yeah. And
right?
so I have another thought that's bubbling, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if it is that the age, what you see in terms of the ageism impacts on certain level jobs more so than others. So, because
That's a
I'm
really
thinking,
interesting question.
yeah, because when I look at some of the boards in the Caribbean, I have seen some pretty old people on boards, or still getting money from boards because they're in advisory roles. And, so I'm thinking in some companies, you have 65-year-olds, 70-year-olds on boards, some of them might be leading, might be leading ministries. And I'm wondering if they are, if leadership positions excludes them from being discriminated against, right? Because I'm thinking especially about our leaders in politics as well. Nobody says you're too old. And that is around the world, right? That is not for any one country. So I'm wondering if there are certain jobs or there are certain roles that you say, okay, but you wouldn't hire somebody who's 70 to work, not even as the head of HR.
Yeah, and that is such an interesting part of this conversation because you're correct. If you look on the boards, and this is across the Caribbean,
Hmm.
even in some North American countries, even in Asian countries, it's older people,
Yeah.
people 70 plus, right? And I don't really want to bring the gender part of it, but usually it's older men.
Well, we could absolutely bring the gender because
So, so
it's a
it's
fact.
usually, so
Yeah.
usually it is older men who sit on
Hmm.
these boards.
Hmm.
And these are the same older men who would say, I don't want somebody who is over 50 as my admin assistant.
Yeah. So make it make sense. I mean,
So
so
it is, as you named it, Maxine, it is bias,
it's fine.
right? It's bias. So let's name a thing a thing. This is clear-cut bias. And when you speak about the rules, it's very interesting because they would say to you, they want somebody with experience, somebody who is qualified, somebody who could lead, who could handle situations, but I don't want somebody too old.
Yeah,
What they
absolutely.
really mean is that they want to be able to, they want that person to be malleable. Because
Hmm.
if I am 50 and you come and you tell me, hey, fire Maxine, and there is no grounds to fire Maxine, or what you want to fire her for, I know the risk to the organization is going to be great. I will challenge you. Somebody with less experience who hasn't had the, who hasn't really navigated that and who may be in fear of speaking up will go ahead and do what they are told. And I think, and I will speak to my experience, that is what I have seen is
Hmm.
that, you know, I want the experience, but the experience must not come with somebody who has too much of an opinion.
So this also brings the word power into it. So
Yes,
what you're describing there, I'm getting the sense that I want somebody experienced and I want somebody who I could have power over. So therefore, I don't want somebody who's older and can advocate for themselves or for other people. I want somebody who is not an advocate, who is not brave enough to stand up to me, who doesn't have years of experience to say this is wrong. So what I'm really hearing is that I want somebody skilled. I don't necessarily want somebody experienced.
that's a very good distinction. And I believe that is, and I will say it, I think that is why we have a leadership crisis
Mm,
in many of our organizations
yeah.
because we want the skill without the experience, but the skill and the experience has to go hand in hand if that person is to be a true leader. And when we take it back to the ageism conversation, somebody, as I said, if you are coming into a workspace with 30 years experience, you're an accountant, you come up through the ranks, they do your ACC or your degree or whatever qualification. Nobody is going to pull wool over your eyes or say, don't put that into the report because it will skew the profits. No, your thing will be you want to protect your reputation. You know what the tenets of your profession gives, and you're not going to jeopardize that. So you are not going to do. that. Whereas I have seen the younger employees, the younger candidates, they may still question, hey, is this something that I could probably do or navigate, while
Yeah,
still.
yeah.
So we have
Well, to
to
me,
address that as well, yes.
I think to be fair to them, there's some people who will stand on principle regardless of age.
True.
And it's more difficult for a less experienced younger person because you're thinking about your career, you're thinking about the
Yes.
power your boss have, you're thinking about where your boss lines and who they line with. So it's a little bit more difficult for a younger person to stand up on it, right? So
Well said, Maxine.
yeah, just
Yes. Yes.
to
So it
clarify that.
is.
Yeah.
Um, but coming back to the rules, I think that people who cross a certain age, it may be easier for them to get roles that are not leadership roles.
Mm,
If they, let me rephrase that. For someone who has been in a leadership role or in a senior role, not necessarily leadership, they've been in a senior role. Unfortunately, they may have lost their job through whatever circumstance. I believe that if they were to downplay their experience, they
mm.
stand a better chance. And you see the advice all the time on LinkedIn. You see
That's so
it on
sad.
Facebook.
It's sad. It's
And I
sad.
always say, anytime I need to downplay my experience, that is not the organization for me.
But
Because
yeah. Go
because
ahead.
I need to be authentic. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I say it's a leadership issue, really and truly, because we have to be brave enough as leaders to hire people who could challenge us and to hire those people with the 30 years experience,
Yeah.
you know, excuse me, who can say, hey, this is another perspective that you need to take into account, and who could hold us, who could put that spotlight on us when we are not doing something that is necessarily in the best interest of all parties. And this is, I'm seeing it on threads, right? I'm on threads a lot. And I know that in the US, they're having unemployment is high. A lot of people have lost their jobs, especially older Black women.
Yeah.
And the advice is always the same. Don't play your qualifications, don't play your experience. Don't put the years that you left college, because you need to appear younger and less experienced than you are.
Yeah, I think that is, that is such I want to talk about two things. So first
Sure.
thing, that is just totally sad because all of the awareness, all of be who you are, all that flies through the window once you start playing with those numbers or once you start downplaying who you are. You're entering feeling less than you are. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then you spoke, and you could respond to that. I just want to plant this seed. You spoke about people who looking for a job. And what about those people who are in a job? They're 55 and they just in a particular role may not have reached leadership, may not have ever reached leadership.
So the people who are looking for a job at 55, I really feel it for them, Maxine.
Yeah, me
And
too.
why I will say that is because most people are not going to get the job that they are applying for at 55,
Or that they qualified for.
or that they are qualified for, or that they're experienced for at
Yeah.
55.
Yeah, it's sad.
Unless, of course, they network themselves into that role,
Yes.
right? Because the first thing that a lot of recruiters will do is say, well, nah, this person, 55 already, they're looking to leave just now, without looking at the whole person. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the most dehumanizing things that bias does, bias
Yeah.
of any kind. It
Hmm.
dehumanizes the person and it reduces you to just one small element of who you are.
Yeah, I want to stick with this a little bit. I think that's such a valid point because whatever the ism is, it is about dehumanizing you and about reducing you to one single factor that somebody could say that becomes very binary. I either like it or I don't like it.
Correct.
Yeah. And
You know,
I just and as you said, I mean, I have I guess a great sadness because it's impacting so many people. We saw 17,500 people join the breadline on Saturday. And I'm just thinking that about people, what it must feel like to take your experience, watch your resume, delete the things that you have achieved, delete your awards, delete your rewards to make yourself seem like just an ordinary Joe so you could get an ordinary job. That's heartbreaking, actually.
that's heartbreaking. And I'm following a person, a couple people, and I'm looking at them navigating that space.
Mm-hmm.
And they will say they have sent out hundreds of resumes. They probably got maybe 10, 15 interviews for jobs that they are well qualified for, well experienced, and not one callback.
Yeah.
I have seen people who are staying, and this is even before this wave of economic despair, who are staying in toxic environments because they say to themselves, I'm already 45, I'm already 47, nobody is going to hire me. One of it is mindset. Huh? So a part of it is
Yeah.
mindset.
Well, it's
But
mindset and
correct. So mindset based on what we know it to be in terms of our social construct, but we cannot get away from the fact that it is a very real ism
yes.
that haunts us in the workspace.
Yeah.
When we have people who you have to, as you correctly said, delete parts of your resume so it become more palatable. You have to go to the hairdresser and get rid of the grays.
Hey.
You spend an hour doing your makeup so less of the wrinkles show. And then you go and you sit in a panel. You answer everything correctly because you know the answers. You've this isn't your first rodeo. You know you can do the job, and then silence.
Me,
And you do this over and over and over.
that's crushing, soul crushing, soul
Yeah,
crushing. And as you were talking about the preparation for the job, the makeup and stuff, is it affecting men and women in the same way?
I think it is.
Okay.
Women more,
Women more. Yeah.
women more. And
Mhm.
I don't know if it's because, so let me be very transparent. I don't know if it's because I advocate more for women,
Right. So you're
that I
interested. Yeah.
follow more women
Yeah.
and I am more interested in how women navigate the workspace.
Yeah.
But from just what I observe on LinkedIn and on threads with people who I have no connection with, it seems to be affecting both genders the same way.
Okay.
Because
Yeah. I wanted to
I
clarify that.
recently I saw a man who was like probably like 54 or something, and he lost his job like 18 months ago, and he was taking like a warehouse job, like an entry level warehouse job,
Hmm. Hmm.
because none of the other jobs that he was qualified for called him back.
Right.
And really and truly, it's I think regardless of gender, the ageism affects us all.
Yeah.
I think in the Caribbean, women are affected more. There's more bias against older women in the workspace.
Hmm.
Um, and you hear it, right? You
Yes.
hear the derogatory terms. You hear, that you should go and find a rocking chair, whatever. You hear the derogatory terms.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you you don't hear the same thing about our male counterparts.
Yes. Yes.
To a lesser degree, you might hear it, but to a lesser degree and to a less harsh degree. So as I said, I may be biased, but I do think it affects women more.
Hmm.
And that is why I am always saddened when I see people shying away from conversation that affects us. Because, I like to talk, I like to write. Yes, that may be a shock to you and to anybody who knows me. And my thing is that I think that we owe it to everybody else to at least bring issues to the forefront. We may not be able to solve it, but we may be able to plant a seed that somebody else could benefit from. Because one thing as I always tell the younger people in my team and in my office, two things are guaranteed. One, if you get it, that you'll get old, and two, if you don't get old, it's because you're dead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We are
Facts.
all we'll all get older, and denying someone the ability to earn an income, to earn a decent income because they have reached a certain age is cruel. It's
Especially when,
cruel.
yeah, because it doesn't matter whether you're a gardener, whether you're
Doesn't matter.
a top leader, once you have the skills, so the word open market is a lie
It
because the
is.
market is naturally closed for some people.
Yeah. And why can't I hire a 53-year-old? Why
Yeah.
should I hire the 35-year-old? The 53-year-old also has bills. In
Yeah.
fact, the 53-year-old needs the money more because they have less years of income to receive.
To save and invest, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I think that is where we have to really start thinking about these kind of issues, especially we have an aging population. Yesterday I was watching a documentary on Japan,
Yeah.
and Japan's population has decreased over 9 million over the last 20 years, I think. And they
Hmm.
have whole towns where the population is just a few hundred, where it used to be hundreds of thousands. Because
Yeah.
really and truly, people are not having kids.
Yeah. In European countries,
And
in some European countries
correct.
as well, especially
So
the
people
Nordic countries.
naturally
Yeah.
need to work a longer time.
Hmm.
People are getting healthier. We're pushing good health, you know. We're pushing good health. We're telling people to move, to be active, to so when they reach 80, don't they need money to live on?
Well, it's a paradox, right? Because I love what you just said because that just hits it in terms of how ridiculous the fact that we have to even have this conversation. Because the fact is we're living longer, we're living healthier, we're moving in ways in which, our parents and grandparents didn't move at the ages we're at. And there now is Botox and facelifting and all of that. So you could move young, you could look young, you could reduce whatever part of your body you want, and yet, so you can consume and you can't earn.
Yeah,
That is ridiculous.
yeah. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people don't look at that perspective.
At the equation, yeah, because it's not a balanced equation, right?
It is not.
It's
So,
a vulgar
yes,
fraction. That's what it is.
it is a vulgar fraction. So you want everybody now, because the whole thing about the blue zones, right? And eating how the people in the blue zones eat. So you want everybody to eat in the blue zones. But how are we supporting them when they reach the 90?
Yeah. Your face looking 30, your body looking 30, and your pocket looking like you're five.
Correct.
Real
You have
aging.
2 cents in your pocket if so much. Like make it make sense. You
Yeah,
know,
make it make sense.
yeah, and I am an advocate that once someone is able to work, once they're healthy and they're able to perform, let them work. And I know people will say, well, after a certain age, you have to make room for the younger ones. No, my answer to that is a clear no. I do not have to retire to make room for any younger one. You know
Yeah,
why? There are always positions open. If I
yeah.
go on LinkedIn now, I will find at least 5 HR positions. I will find at least 5 accounting positions. I do not have to stop working before I want to stop working to make room for anyone. My bills matter.
Your bills matter. Yeah, your bills matter. So
My
Leslie,
bills matter.
I know we have a few people on the call, so I want to open up the line. If anyone in the audience, you don't need to put on the camera if you don't want to, but if you want to share any thoughts or ask any questions on our discussion this evening, we have some space that we could do that. So go right ahead if you want to say anything.
Or they could put it in the chat.
They could personally chat. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Leslie,
So
Mark,
go ahead.
I want to, yeah, vis-a-vis the gender as it aligns with the ageism,
Mm-hmm.
is real, and it is a fact that men do not, in Trinidad, I can speak for, and maybe some of the regional countries, but less so. In Trinidad especially, the men do not suffer from that ageism as much as the women. It is a far greater gap. You would find an executive, whether they network with them or not, rehiring a retired male versus a retired or semi-retired female. And I am not sure if it has to do with some sort of ego. I know it might sound silly, but I feel it's some egoistical factor. Because health-wise, I'm as I'm looking at my own self, and going back, after one career, going back into the corporate world or trying to, I can speak from a place of experience of knowing that ageism is real,
Mm-hmm.
irregardless of my health and my agility and my experience, and even so, the ability to be humble when I go into an organization and to adapt to what the organization requires, more so than younger people who I might interface with, say, in the kitchen area or so on, who will be grumbling and they're getting 5-figure salaries. Can you imagine that? They're getting 5-figure salaries for low-end jobs, but they are grumbling about their employer. Something that I could say I will never do, even with my most difficult client, because
Yeah.
I come from that space of knowing the commodity that a job responsibility is, that having a job and having someone, an organization depend on you to deliver on that job. It is something that that younger people, I think now, do not have because of their extreme ability to be mobile in the marketplace because of their age and to be fluid. So traditionally, the traditional values that we may have in the 45 to 65 age group, the younger Gen Zs and millennials may not have that. It even made me tell my son the other day that if he does not organize himself by 45, he will never be able to organize himself. And I told him from a good place because he's organizing himself. But I want him to know that ageism is real too. And also
Yeah.
that if he wants to be mobile in his career, he has to make a move on
Yeah.
because of what I'm seeing out there. And he's experienced it with me because I speak outwardly to him. He sees me when I go after projects or whatever, what you're up against, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so what do you think, Leslie? Do you think is it a study? Is there a study or something that we can do to actually identify how much it is of impacting and how we can advocate for it? Or advocate for just as much as we advocate for having female presence at the board level, right? Balance at the board level, and not just female, but experienced females, of course, who have aligned skill sets, but also that we advocate that a certain amount of a certain age group is considered at least at the point of being heard or getting an interview.
Yeah. I think, Catherine, that what you said is so very true. You will see them rehiring the older men as advisors, or they coming back on a contract, and you hardly see the women getting those opportunities. That is such
Hardly.
a true observation. And I think a big part has to do with the old boys club.
Yes.
Men advocate for men in a much different way than women do. And I don't want to get into that
Yeah.
gender conversation, but men advocate for men in a different way. A man will know a partner struggling and they would pull him in and give him a job. They ain't too sure what the job is, but they will give
Yes.
him a job or they will call in a favor from somebody else and say, hey, I have a partner who really looking for something. Women will say,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I hope everything works out.
Yeah,
But you
true.
know what?
Yes.
Let's meet and have coffee in Starbucks next week.
Yes.
Yeah?
Very true.
So we advocate differently. Um, and then it's very true what you told your son. I was telling my daughter the other day, I said the years between 18 and 28 are some of your most important years. I said,
Very true.
because that is building the foundation that you can't see as yet. And it is important that we have those conversations with our younger generation because I believe that as they get older, the workforce will also get older than we are seeing. It has to.
Yeah, it must.
National Insurance Board has no money to pay us our pension.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an example that is replicated in many other countries where the
That's right.
pension is just not there.
It
So
crashes.
correct, so we need money to buy our Bengay balsam for our joints. So we have to continue working.
Oh, I'm
Um,
lifting weights to avoid that.
I'm just joking, right? But in terms
Yeah, I
of
know.
advocating for it, I really think that it is our duty as people who are seeing the effects on it to speak on it.
Yeah.
We
I
have,
think,
we, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
we have
Leslie.
to speak on it.
Absolutely. I think it's so important because it's one of those things that we don't talk about. I think we've spoken about everything and everything is out in the open, but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's maybe some shame to go with it, the shame that you're older, the shame that this is a problem. I think because there's been such massive job loss in the US last year and the impacts of it, I think the stats in 2025 were 500,000 Black women. I think those voices are speaking up because it has landed on their doorstep and they're seeing the effects of it, trying to get back onto the workforce. And outside of that, I don't remember it being a conversation. And it always happened. So it's like it's reached critical mass now so that people are talking about it. So before we move to wrap up, I just wanted to know if anybody else wanted to say anything before we close off.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Hi,
I'll
good
try
night.
to
Hello.
be brief. And
No, go take
I
your time. Be good.
I love the framing of this question, and I'm just wondering if we kind of hone in on that because everybody's hair is probably within that age gap, right? Because when you ask the question, why not hire an older person? Of course, that already assumes there's a downside. But this feels like one of those leadership habits that we've learned over time that we might need to unlearn. Because using age as a shortcut for things like adaptability or cost, meaning instead of really assessing someone's mindset, I guess, or ability to grow, we kind of make quick assumptions based on age because I think it probably feels safer, maybe even faster. So I am also thinking that one of the follow-up question, I guess, is what are we actually trying to solve? If it's adaptability, then that's not really an issue, that's a mindset thing. Because I have seen younger employees struggle with change just as much as older ones. And at the same time, we say we value experience, but when the experience shows up in an older candidate, then leaders hesitate. So there's always that contradiction there. So I think maybe the shift for leadership isn't choosing between younger or older. It really is more about unlearning these assumptions and focus on the people who are still learning or still willing to learn, right? Rather, especially if they're still relevant, because how we build our teams that combine I guess, the experience with fresh thinking, for want of a
Yeah.
better word.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this, Candace, that's how bias works, right? So insert woman, insert people of a certain race, and into any of those arguments you made there. And that's exactly how they work because they're not grounded on anything scientific. They're not grounded
Yeah.
on any evidence. They're grounded on a feeling. They're grounded on this is what my mother said. This is what I learned.
Yeah.
This is how it used
Yeah.
to be. It's really not scientific. And that's why, I'm so happy that Leslie spoke so eloquently on the ways in which this ageism shows up. Because that's what it is. It's an ism, just another one we have to deal
Exactly.
with. Yeah, absolutely. So Leslie, any last words for us before we move to close? So thank you, Candice, and thank you, Catherine,
You're
for
welcome.
pitching in your thoughts. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Maxine, and thanks, Candice and Catherine. So I just want to pick up on what Candice said in terms of what are we trying to solve in the workspace? What are we trying to solve? You know, is it adaptability? Is it flexibility? Are we just choosing what is quickest? And I think that's a great way to end because when you have a problem, the quickest solution isn't always the best one. And we really have to bring more thought into the conversations with regards to who we hire, why are we hiring that person, and how do we ensure, as I, when I began, I said, how do we ensure that we are honoring all age groups, all demographics in the workspace? Because once someone is in the workspace, they need to be honored in a certain way. The things that we get away with in how we treat older people, we would not think twice about doing it to a younger person. We dismiss people because, well, that person looking old, she don't even color her hair. What does that have to do with ability? Some people start growing from the time they're 20, So I think, it's important. And of course, we just touch on the surface, but I think it's such an important conversation, Maxine. And thank you for giving me the ear to say it because, as Gen X in the workplace, it's an important conversation. And millennials will be the older people at one stage. The Gen Zs will be older at one stage. And therefore, we need to start having those discussions. We need to have discussions that center around honoring people rather than looking at age. And as we correctly said, it's just another ism. Let's deal with it as such.
So Leslie, in terms of people who want to follow you, where can they best follow you?
They can follow me on LinkedIn at
Mm-hmm.
Leslie Ferrier-Attong.
Mm-hmm.
They can follow me on Facebook, Leslie FA Coach.
Mm-hmm.
They can follow me on Instagram, same. They can follow me on Threads.
Since you spent a lot of time there.
They can follow me on TikTok.
Right.
So I am on all the major social media platforms. I speak about career, I speak about parenting mostly. And every now and then I love to ruffle people's feathers and throw, throw a spoon into the pot that does not belong. So I like to do it because I think that, especially in the Caribbean, we shy away from different perspectives that may not be aligned with the mainstream. So every now and then, I like to throw out a perspective there to see how people think and just to get a conversation going. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Leslie. So you really got the conversation going today. This topic of, older people in the workforce, people who are looking for a job, this whole idea of losing your identity, losing your achievements because you have to fit yourself into a space that really probably doesn't even want you. And this, I love the idea, the paradox between the non-aging, remove wrinkles, fix your body, you can, And the fact is that, even though you do that, you're still left outside. And I think the question is so important, what's next? And I love the idea of putting it into the space is enough. We don't have to solve it. It may not be our mission to solve it. And we can bring people into awareness so that they can stop and question, am I running an ism here? Is my bias showing against older people? So really, I want to thank you for showing up today and having this really provocative and interesting and revealing conversation, because when we think about ageism, we usually think about younger people. And that's what we do here at Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. Every week, Tuesday at 7 p.m., we have a guest who is provocative, who shares from their heart, who shares from their thoughts. And that's what we're here to do: unlearn what you've learned before about leadership, and we offer reframes. So see you next week, same time, same channel. Thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us this evening. And thank you, Catherine and Candace, for joining us. Take care of yourselves, guys.
Thank you,
Bye.
Max.
Bye.
Have a good evening.